Hello again, everybody. Welcome to Conservation Conversations with Stornoway. And on behalf of the band, I've been hosting these, talking to lots of friends of the band and collaborators and people we're interested in generally because we've been watching what they've been up to musically. Today's guest is no exception to that. As you know, our new album Beyonder, which is out in September, is full of sounds of the natural world, and very much so that the ocean plays a role in that. And if you came to our Royal Albert Hall show in March, the soundscapes we used there included the giant blue whale jumping into a vortex and sounds from the bottom of the ocean. We have populated our songs over the years with seabirds and crashing waves, and it's something, as in a habitat, that has really fed everything we've done lyrically and musically. So the ocean is something we really care about. If you go back to the earliest days of Stornoway, the Good Fish Guide was a song that we released and sent all the profits to the Marine Conservation Society. And we've always had a lot to do with conservation of marine habitats. So today I'm really thrilled to be joined by another musician who has a lot to do with the conservation messages around marine biology. This is one of the members of Sonic Collaborations, and I can't wait for you to hear more from Colin Riley. Welcome, Colin. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks Ollie for inviting me.
Pleasure to have you here. I want to talk to you about our usual topics here: conservation of music tradition, conservation of the environment, but then also about the events you guys have got coming up and your brilliant album that came out and that people can listen to now. So, where do you want to dive in? What's inspiring you today?
Well, I mean, I do a lot of different things. One of the things is this new album called Ocean Songs, which has been a huge part of what I've been doing over the last year. But a lot of my work as a composer obviously involves other kind of collaborations and stuff on my own. And as you rightly said in the beginning, putting a message out there about conservation is one of the things that we as creatives we all get involved with, really, because it's an important issue that is, I mean, nature inspires us, and the idea that we could lose a lot of things is quite an imperative, really, to discuss.
Absolutely. One of the other themes across the Conservation Conversations series that we've been running is that many of the guests are trained, qualified conservationists. So they've done research into bird populations and
Yeah,
how
yeah.
to help them thrive. How close are you guys to the scientific community involved in conservation, perhaps through your relationship with that Ocean Rising group?
Yeah, I'm very aware that as a composer or a creative in music, that very often you can just sort of kind of make music that kind of is about nature, and it's very important to I think to make collaborations because it makes your work deeper and it makes it more valid, I think. And with Ocean Songs, which is the project that we're talking about really here, we were very lucky to collaborate with several scientists, but in particular one scientist called Helen Chertsky, who wrote a best-selling book, actually, an award-winning book, should I say, really, called Blue Machine. And in that book, she talks about how the ocean is, I mean, essentially it's interconnected to us all, but it connects us all as human beings. And particularly, I was struck by one of the images in the early part of the book, which talks about the early space missions, where for the first time people saw the whole planet back at them as a kind of mirror, and that the overriding image of that planet was a blue planet because of the oceans and the seas. And so we took Helen's book. What was really nice is we made contact with Helen, one of our members of the band, Steve Pretty, our trumpet and conch player, knew Helen, and so we were able to collaborate with her, really, and use her knowledge and also use her book, I suppose, quote from the book. And she was very kind enough to actually get involved with the recording of the album, so that we might come on to talk about this, but particularly about songs and songwriting. But she speaks on the album, and it's really important to get information across, which sometimes when you speak information, it comes across a different way. When you sing stuff, it touches a different part of the body, a different emotion, I suppose. So the scientific data stuff is spoken on this album, and it's spoken by a scientist. So that's good enough for me.
Yeah, that's fascinating. The world of data analysis and data engineering, which I actually am part of in my day job, is full of the encouragement of people to take data visualization seriously, because
Mm.
visualizing can be such a powerful storyteller when you're trying to convey complicated mathematical or scientific data. But not just visualization, we're talking here about, what would you call it, sonicification or something?
Sonification is quite a big thing. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
people are doing music all over, which takes data as the basis for mapping that to some kind of sound. I think it's when it's done really well, it is brilliant. But there's a lot of stuff which is just mapping, the sound, the data of something to a kind of MIDI, a rubbishy MIDI sound, and it kind of like it's wasting the kind of the essence of what the beauty there and the detail. So it's an interesting area certainly to watch.
Yeah. And I have bumped into Steve Pretty through a different project at a festival last summer and saw him playing this conch.
Yeah, yeah,
What a
it's
brilliant
great.
musician! And Steve's in the Hackney Colliery band and all
Yeah,
sorts of things like that.
yeah,
Um, so just to the Stornoway fans tuning in, and I can see a few of you here asking questions and getting involved. We'll come back to you shortly. Just go check out, Sonic Collaborations. They're on Instagram here. You can see them as a co-host of
yeah.
this video, and go along to any of the events they're doing, and certainly check out that new album, Ocean Songs.
Great. Thanks for the plug.
Well, Colin, I'd like to dip into our two conservation questions then. So these are the ones I ask every guest, and I guess I would set a slight challenge to you by saying every time we ask these, the answers get more and more interesting and sort of unexpected, and we have such great chats around them. I ask people about musical conservation and then about nature conservation, and they
Mm,
come up with the most amazing stories. I think I'll start with, as we're talking about nature conservation and ecology, I'll start there and say, is there a place that you and other members of the project perhaps collaborate in or reference in your songs, or that you've all been to individually and you share a recollection of? A place that brings nature in as a creative spirit and feeds nature into the music making.
yeah, Ollie, I want to be the most interesting I can be for your listeners. But the answer to that one is this album was created really online with through a process. We actually took 3 months to do it from start to finish. So it gives you an idea that how quick it had to be. That said, I know that Steve is very, very involved with nature sounds. He does underwater diving, and he's using his special water microphones to capture stuff. And I know that my work is very rooted in place because I use a lot of field recordings. Yeah, yeah. I think everyone understands what I mean by that. So as you mentioned earlier, it could be something as simple as birdsong. But not just to sort of pepper what I'm doing, but I mean, in a recent work for the BBC National Orchestra of Wales, I got lucky enough to write a piece for a large orchestra, and that was all about trying to find a way that you can kind of break open a field recording of a place and try and make the music built out of the pitches and the rhythms and and whatever and the tones of the field recording, rather than it just be an overlay. And that was a really interesting process for me. So for me personally, I can't speak for obviously all the members of the group that made Ocean Songs, but it's been in my work now for sort of 10, 15 years, using the sounds of a place and of nature. And you can't help, once you're using that, you can't help but be putting a kind of ecological message out there.
Absolutely. That's really fascinating. And it reminds me of a collaborator of ours called Alice Boyd, who you may have come
Yeah,
across.
yeah, I
Yeah.
know of Alice Boyd. Yeah,
Yeah. Alice is supporting us in Norwich at the Norwich and Norfolk Festival coming up soon, and is one of the most exciting artists I know of in the field recordings kind of scene.
mm,
Produces the podcast for Fern and all sorts of things, and weaves the field recordings into her music in similar way to what I think you're
yeah.
saying there. So are you saying that we hear notes and chords out there in natural spaces, and we can then take what we are already hearing and build onto it, maybe build chords and build even melodies?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that wasn't what we did very much in Ocean Songs. There's an exception to that. There's a song on it called Every Wave, and we really just trying to sort of explore the beauty of waves. And there are, I think, some sounds of waves, but the different layers. There might be about 7 or 8 layers we build up. We have a choir, we have lead vocal, we have processed trumpet and keyboards and all sorts of things. One of the origins of that song was actually using the data collected from waves, from a previous project that didn't actually happen in the end, but working with scientists, and I was able to create a kind of let's call it an ostinato, a repeating pattern, a chord sequence, I suppose, of interwoven lines, so that it wasn't chords in the sense that chords go down together, but it was chords going down after each other, like an arpeggio, I
Yeah, I
suppose.
see. Yeah.
And that was built entirely by mapping these waves to pitches, and then making a song out of it.
Yeah, fascinating. There's a friend of the band called Ben, who's a prolific sailor, crosses the Atlantic multiple times a year, and as a result knows a lot about the sounds of waves.
Mm.
And Ben was talking to me after a gig the other day about how when you're on a 4-hour shift, because the crew would tend to take these shifts so that there's always someone awake at the helm watching what's going on, they'll start to hear at some point into that 4-hour, usually solitary shift, they'll start to hallucinate sonically, and the waves will create voices and
Yeah,
music. And it, because the white noise of the waves is not a machine generated white noise with the same pattern going around, which you could expect to eventually find patterns in if the mind is presented the same thing 1,000 times, it sees the patterns. But because it's a totally organic, unpredictable, random white noise, the idea of the hallucinations is even weirder because oh,
it's
go on.
definitely the thing. I mean, people talk about wellness in nature, and
Yeah,
not tree hugging, but what's it called when you tree bathing,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and immersing yourself. And sonically, if you're immersing yourself as well, you're doing something over time, as you just pointed out.
Yes.
That's very, very important. I mean, so the song I'm just talking about had to be a certain length because it couldn't be a 3.5 minute song. So it's a kind of 5.5 minute song. Things like that are really important to me. That we do stretch people, because I think music changes over time. If you hear it, a kind of, as it were, the ambient kind of end of music does
Yes.
change the way you're hearing things, and it deepens your kind of experience over 5, 6, 7, 8 more minutes.
Absolutely. Well, there's your encouragement, Stornoway fans. Head out into nature, like as we're always telling you to do, and go in and engage in the unpredictable sonic environments of the world out there. We love telling people about not just, say, the ocean as a habitat, because that has so much to it. There's everything from the salt marsh, which we reference explicitly in one of our songs, through to different types of coastlines, and even up in the air where the seabirds live and they never come down. Is there a way that you guys could perform some of your music on the sea, Colin? Do you have intention to go out on a boat and perform for people that way?
Well, we premiered the piece at First Light Festival in Lowestoft, which is, for those who don't know, it's the town that gets the first bit of light in the UK. And we were there on the summer solstice last year, and we were performing as the dawn arose over the sea. That was quite chaotic in a sense, because the wind was blowing, the sand getting in my keyboard. I had some music, and I couldn't see it, and I had to peg it to stop it from flying around. I think it would even get even worse on board a ship. But then we did premiere the album with a launch a couple of months ago on what is London's only floating venue,
I see.
which is called Theatre Ship,
Okay.
Canary Wharf. And
Yeah.
actually, as we were playing, the boat was creaking. So there's a
Mm.
lovely moment when we were between songs, and I was talking a little bit, introducing things, and suddenly you could feel a bit of movement and a creak, and it felt like the right place to do it. So I love your idea. It would be great to tour around the coast on a ship. But I mean, it's difficult enough to tour, as you know,
Of
anyway,
course,
and
of
get all
course.
the equipment in one place and all the people in one place. But yeah, maybe we could talk about that.
Well, meanwhile, people can head to, I believe, Wilton's Music Hall in May, and then Latitude Festival in
Yeah,
July if
yeah.
they want to see some ocean songs.
Yeah, I think the 19th of May at Wilton's Music Hall, we're playing not the whole of Ocean Songs, but Steve, our trumpeter, he hosts a fantastic sort of thing called Origin of the Pieces. And it's a sort of deconstruction of a theme, and I think the theme is probably going to be the sea in this instance. So we're probably going to play about 4 or 5 tracks from that, and there's going to be a bit of chat and discussion and Q&A as well. So yeah,
Wonderful.
do come along to that. I think it'd be a kind of interesting evening.
Yeah. And then we can talk about conservation of music, given
Mm.
we're touching on what it's like to bring music sounds out of the environment. So we've taken our inspiration from nature. I'm now going to ask you about the blending of the old and the new. So is there a favorite example? A lot of people responding to this will reach to say folk music. An example for you of an older tradition of music making that has been brought back to life by someone writing perhaps some original lyrics or doing something innovative. What's your best example of blending the old and the new?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question. I'm sure people answer it in different ways. I mean, just a bit of background about me. I'm a classical musician, but
Yes.
I've strayed into what you might call electronic music and folk music and pop music and stuff, jazz as well, because it's all great stuff out there. But my tradition, I suppose, is of song being something like a piano and a voice. So you're thinking, my big traditions would have been growing up would have been, Schubert and then Benjamin Britten and people like that. So I love the idea of creating a song, but it doesn't have to be my own words, which is often the case, with people. They feel they've got to have their personal message, although I do that. But the setting of musical setting of poetry, particularly, or other texts, there's a big tradition of that. And I like trying to find a new spin on that. And I had a project a few years ago called In Place, which had field recordings and was setting poetry. And it was really somewhere between a song cycle, which is the traditional way that you might describe a set of songs, and a concept album, which is a slightly newer kind of form. So it was very much an album and a recorded artifact, but we did play it live. So just extending what a song can be, not just in length, but in its design, its structure, the fact that it might not have to have a chorus and it might be what you'd call through composed. In other words, it never repeats. Those sorts of things are interesting to me. How can we hold someone's attention by in balance having the tradition and, as it were, there at the audience expectation, and something new, which is like teasing their ear and tickling their imagination to think, oh right, what's going to happen next? So that's quite a long answer to what I tend to do, and certainly Ocean Songs does that as well, in its makeup.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Is there a particular piece or song cycle that you'd recommend to someone who's never encountered, say, some of the classical song traditions?
There's a fantastic piece that I come back to time and time again. I mean, the composer Benjamin Britten is he died in gosh, the late 70s, early 80s, possibly late 70s, I think it was. So he's not new, but to some people he's not traditional in the sense that it's not Mozart or Beethoven. But he wrote a fantastic. He wrote lots of songs, and there's one particular called Serenade for Tenor, Horn and Strings, and it's not a great sexy title, but it tells you what it is. It's a singer with string orchestra and a horn, and the music in each song, he does this thing called word painting, very cleverly, which is the meaning of the song is expressed through the way the music works. So an example would be if you're making music about a stream or a river, you might have flowing patterns. But
Yes.
you can listen to that music time and time again, and get more and more out of it because the poems are so brilliant, and his setting of those poems is brilliant.
Okay. Yeah, I've come across those, and didn't he set some of the Schubert songs from a very long time ago? Perhaps
Yeah,
I'm.
he's done also.
And
Schubert was a big influence on
yeah.
Benjamin Britten. But
Mm.
there's countless examples that follow Benjamin Britten of what you might call classical composers alive and working now, and
Mm.
crossover composers. Extending the form of a song.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, I also wanted to find a way of mentioning in this chat about your Substack, because I've read a few of the really brilliant articles on there, and you've got some great insights. And yeah, that seems like a good place to mention to people. If you want to hear more about Colin's recommendations and the background to Colin's music making, go check him out on Substack. It's called colin249.substack.com.
Yeah.
Um, music is not a drop down menu. I love
Oh
that
yeah, that was the
title.
latest one, I think. Yeah. Writing a blog is often a way of just being able to document your thoughts, really.
Yeah.
And we're often talking to the not a void, but we're talking out there to somebody as well. And you never quite know if you're performing. People usually clap at the end. You'll know they're there.
Yeah.
But sometimes with things like blogs, you're kind of you're hoping that somebody's there,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's quite a different process. So
Yes.
it's kind of freeing in a way because I can say some things that are quite personal and
Yeah.
sometimes vaguely provocative, I guess, as well.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite things about the blogging as a sort of medium and as an approach is one of those audience members is your future self, and so you don't know whether a week down the line or 10 years down the line, your future self will go, "Well
Yeah,
done, that was
yeah,
good insight."
yeah, yeah.
Well, thank you. It's been really, really brilliant, and I really appreciate those answers to our two standard questions. And I'm glad we got to talk about your project,
Brilliant.
and recommend people to check it out. Thank you
Thank
very
you
much.
for having me, Ollie. Thank you very
To
much. Yeah.
let people know to get excited about before we close.
Mhm. What was the question? Anything to get excited about?
Anything else you want to recommend to people check out?
Well, obviously, if you're anywhere in the region of Latitude Festival, come and see us there because the big thing there is we've actually got Helen Chertsky live with the band, which is I have no idea how that's going to work yet. But a scientist speaking with electric viola, conch shells, keyboards, and guitar. It's going to be an interesting collision. So yeah, come and see that maybe.
Definitely. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and I hope you go check out the Ocean Songs album for sure. And it's been a pleasure to have you here.
Pleasure
Thank you.
to be here. Thanks, Ollie.